Alrighty, good evening, everyone. Let's start with hymn 13. So hymn 13, O Worship the King. We'll do all four verses. O worship the King, all glorious above, and gratefully sing his wonderful love. Our shield and defender, the ancient of days, pavilioned in splendor and girded with praise. O tell of his might, O sing of his grace, whose robe is the light, whose canopy space, his chariots of wrath the deep thunder clouds form, and dark is his path on the wings of the storm. Thy bountiful care, what tongue can recite? It breathes in the air, it shines in the light, it streams from the hills, it descends to the plain, and sweetly distills in the dew and the rain. Frail children of dust, and feeble as frail, in thee do we trust, nor find thee to fail. Thy mercies, how tender, how firm to the end. Our Maker, Defender, Redeemer, and Friend. All right, let's go ahead and pray. Father, thank you that we could be here tonight. Lord, thank you for bringing us all here safely. Lord, I pray that you would bless the evening, and Lord, bless the preacher as he brings your word. And Lord, I pray that our hearts would be attentive, and that we'd receive it. And then, Lord, I pray that you'd bless our prayer time. Thank you, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, 326. Hymn 326. I love to tell the story. We'll do all four verses of that as well. So 326. I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and his glory, of Jesus and his love. I love to tell the story because I know 'tis true. It satisfies my longings as nothing else can do. I love to tell the story, 'twill be my theme and glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and his love. I love to tell the story, more wonderful it seems than all the golden fancies of all our golden dreams. I love to tell the story, it did so much for me, and that is just the reason I tell it now to thee. I love to tell the story, 'twill be my theme time I tell it, more wonderfully sweet. I love to tell the story, for some have never heard the message of salvation from God's own holy word. I love to tell the story. 'Twill be my theme and glory to tell the old story of Jesus and his love. I love to tell the story for those who know it best, seem hungering and thirsting to hear it like the rest. And when in scenes of glory I sing a new song, 'twill be the old story that I have loved so long. I love to tell the story. 'Twill be my theme and glory to tell the old story of Jesus and his love. Thank you, guys.
Give me a bottle of water if you can find one. Good evening, everybody. Good to see you. Glad you're here. And my voice is struggling, and I apologize. I don't normally preach in tennis shoes, but I literally drove in the parking lot. Just got back from Gary, Indiana, and I've been staying in Gary the last 2 nights, and was at a preacher's fellowship and preached last night. And my voice is not what it needs to be. David Canny booked the Airbnb for us, and I usually check where those are at, pretty close. And night before I was leaving, I checked the address, and I thought, Gary, Indiana. And has anybody ever been to Gary? About 4 of you, 5 of you. You probably didn't stay long, I bet. I got looking at that. I thought, I don't think I've ever stayed in Gary, Indiana. And I sent the address to 3 or 4 of my friends up in that area. And I said, this is where we're staying. And they said, oh, you're joking, right? I said, no, I'm not. They said, oh, Brother Jones, don't stay there. I said, that's a pretty bad neighborhood there, which is Gary, and it's a bad neighborhood in Gary. And so it's too late. We're there. There's 5 of us staying there. And so I pull off the interstate, start pulling into Gary. And for every open business, there's probably 10 burned out, covered over, or roof collapsed business that I'm passing. I'm thinking, what in the world am I doing here? It did help my prayer life a lot, though. And we didn't have any trouble, really. I was driving back from lunch yesterday, and something was wrong with the car, and ended up my front brake had seized up or locked up, and it's too late for them to work on it. They worked on it this morning, and finally got me out of there, and I literally jumped in the car, got gas, and came here. So that's the story, and I'm sticking with it. So if you would turn to the book of Job. I do have a printout from last week, and if you were not here last week, I'll print that for you. I'll try to print it before you leave today so you can have that. and I'm going to try to do some printouts along the way. Job is a book that oftentimes we find difficult to understand. And we talk about the book of Job being about the patience of Job, but really it's about the God of Job. It shows us how God deals with mankind. And so we're going to learn something about Job, obviously, but we're going to learn something about the God of Job and how God brings his servants along. And there's 3 friends plus 1 that we're going to meet along the way. The 3 friends show up in Job's backyard in the midst of his suffering. The first thing the 3 friends do is they are silent for a week. That may be the best work that they do, the silence. It is the ministry of silence, or you could say it is the ministry of presence. Someone's hurting, and you go to the hospital, and you say, I don't know what to say to him. Maybe you don't say anything. Maybe you're just there. Someone's in the nursing home. You say, I hate going to the nursing home. I don't know what to say to people because I'm going to leave and they're going to have to stay. You go, and maybe you're silent, and you're just there with them. You go to the funeral home. Man, who knows what to say at a funeral home? I mean, it's tough, isn't it? It's difficult to give people what they need to have, comfort. And you say, I don't have a verse for this. I don't know what to say from the Word of God. I'm at a loss. Oftentimes, just you being there is the comfort. After the 7 days, they open their mouth, and it gets really interesting there. That's some of that back and forth between Job's friends and Job is what is difficult to kind of wade through. And we're going to figure that out. We're going to see what God's doing here. And so we just basically last week, all we did was introduce Job. And so let's start again. Job chapter 1, verse number 1. It says, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance also was 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels and 500 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the East. Let's just very quickly think again about what it's talking about here about Job. He's living in a place called Uz. His name is Job. And it says that this man is perfect. He's a man that is complete. He's not perfect in the sense that he's never sinned. It doesn't mean that. It means that he's blameless. He's somebody that you couldn't really say anything bad about him. You can't think of anything bad about this man. He's upright, morally upright. He's straight in his thinking, straight in his mind. He's someone that feared God. He didn't want to displease the Lord. He's somebody that if he's confronted with something, he's going to think about, what's God think about this? What does God want me to do? How does God want me to proceed? He's a God-centered man. He's living his life around that thought. There are really 2 ways to go through life. You could either be have a God-centered life, or you can have a man-centered life. What do I want to do? What's going to make me happy? What's going to fulfill all my pleasures? Or you can think about it like this: be a God-fearing man, God-fearing woman. And then it says that he eschewed evil. He pushed away from it. He didn't want to be around it. He abstained from it. He got away from it. So that is his description. Sometimes when we describe people, we start with a physical. God's not starting with a physical. He's starting with the most important thing. He's talking about his character, his spiritual makeup. It begins to describe him as far as his physical world. It says in verse number 2 that he has 7 sons and 3 daughters. So how many children does he have? He's got 10. Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate that. I was trying to count it up and couldn't quite get there. And so he has 10 children. He has a pretty good household there. He has a lot of sons and daughters there. It says that his substance, talks about his substance. It doesn't talk about what he has in the bank. It doesn't talk about silver and gold. And the way they date this book is kind of by how they describe his wealth. He seems to be a wealthy man. His wealth is determined by his substance or by his cattle, by his livestock. He has 7,000 sheep. I don't know that I've ever seen a farm. I'm sure they have them. 7,000 sheep seems like a lot of sheep. 7,000 sheep. And you think about having to shear those sheep, to take the fleece off of those sheep. And so that's a lot of work there. It says that he had 3,000 camels. Anybody ever owned a camel? Anyone? No camel owners in this business. I'm not talking about the ones that you would smoke. Not those. The kind that you would ride. Apparently there are different kinds of camels, different humps on those things. I don't know, it doesn't say what make and model these are, but these are transportation. You see a bunch of cars in the driveway, you think, man, they must have a lot of people live there, or the very wealthy have different kinds of cars, a collection of cars. So they have these camels. Then it says they have 500 yoke of oxen and 500 she-asses. These are like tractors. These are beasts of burden. They pull things. They plow things. And so when it says here, it says, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the East. I think it's not just talking about his substance there, though. I think it's talking about what kind of man he was, what kind of character he had. He's the greatest. He said, man, you ever have somebody that was a great neighbor? He said, man, they're great neighbors. They're good neighbors. I could count on my neighbors. If we need to borrow something, we can go there. If we're gone, they could watch the house. And, they never give us any grief. They're just good people. I'm glad we have those neighbors. And so Job would be a man that you say he's a great man. He's a good man. He's somebody you could turn to in the midst of a storm. It says in verse number 4, it says his sons went out and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And so this seems to be a close-knit family. This is a family that has a man, a dad, a husband that is morally right. They have some wealth, no doubt about it. And it seems that they have a strong family here. It says in verse 5, and it was so when the days of their feasting were gone about that Job sent and sanctified them and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. Anybody have any sons? Any sons? Yeah, you had sons. It says here, he said they may have sinned. I think maybe my sons have sinned over the course of their life, no doubt. And so he says they may have sinned, so I'm going to offer burnt offerings for them. I'm going to sanctify them. I'm going to help them along the way. And so he was a spiritual head. And this also dates the book. This is before the temple. This is before Israel proper. It puts him probably back in the days of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And so it's dating the book this way. And it says the last little phrase, that last little sentence in verse number 5, it says, thus did Job continually. Here's somebody that wasn't religious just one day a week. This wasn't just somebody that it was something they picked up and laid down, and then they picked it up again and they laid it down again. This is somebody that it was a continual walk with God. It was a continual concern for his children. It was a continual work that is going on there. And so it's the scene shifts in verse number 6. We're now leaving Job for a moment, and it says in verse number 6, it says, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. Now, we don't know much about this. We don't know what all is going on there, what is required, but Satan shows up and he has to give an account to God. He has to present himself to the Lord. Now, a lot of people, the only spiritual training, the only thing they know about spiritual things is what they know from movies. Used to pick up children on a van when we lived in Hanover. I pastored the church there, and I pick up children in a van, and we go around the block where we lived, and I'm thinking of a certain family, and we'd get to their house, and I'd usually honk the horn, they'd come out, but some days they would drag out. Some days I'd knock on the door, and they'd be waking up, and they'd be stumbling out to the van. And I said, I'll say, what's going on, guys? Why are you running so late today? Why are you so behind schedule? Oh, we stayed up till 3 in the morning. These would be little bitty kids. We stayed up at 3 in the morning. I said, what are you doing up at 3 in the morning? We were watching scary movies. And they'd tell me about the movies they're watching, about demons and Satan and all that. And sometimes they would ask me things about Satan that they saw in the movies. They thought Satan and God oftentimes were on the same par. They thought Satan had the same power as that God had. You know, if your theology comes from Hollywood or your theology comes from the movies, you're going to get it wrong. Because Satan is not on par with God. Satan is a created being. God made him. He is an angel, and he has boundaries, and he has limits and limitations, and he is not omnipotent. He is not omnipresent, not all-knowing. He's not everywhere present. And so he comes. There are boundaries in this being's existence. And the Lord said unto Satan, whence comest thou? And then Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth and from walking up and down in it. What does 1 Peter 5 tell us about Satan? What does that tell us about Satan? It tells us some things about him. It says, 1 Peter 5, let me get there here. I'll read just a little bit. He's a roaring lion, isn't he? 1 Peter 5, verse 8, it says, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. You look at the verse here, he says, God asked Satan, what have you been doing? He said, I've been walking and going to and fro and walking up and down in the earth. We know from verse 8 of chapter 5 of 1 Peter that what he's walking and is going and is doing is this, that we are to be sober and vigilant because we have an adversary that is going to and fro, that is going up and down. An adversary, and it says the devil doesn't say that he is a roaring lion, but as a roaring lion. That is a description of the kind of being he is. He is a roaring lion. He is an animal that is uncaged. He is an animal that wants to get loose. You ever heard about the little boy that was on the front row watching the preacher preach, and he had the microphone, he had the cord back into the sound system, and he's walking to and fro, and he's screaming, he's preaching, he's loud. The little boy got out of church that day, and he told his mom and dad, he said, I'm scared if he ever gets loose of that chain. If he ever gets loose, I don't want him to get me. Satan is like a roaring lion walking about seeking whom he may devour. And he's presenting himself to the Lord, and he is in many ways unloosed, unchained for this season that we're in. But there are limitations on him. And the Lord said unto him in verse number 8 of Job chapter 1, it says, Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth? You remember the description that we had in verse number 1 about Job, perfect, upright, one that feared God, eschewed evil? Where did that description come from? It wasn't made up by Job. That wasn't Job's description of himself. You know, that would be kind of an interesting thing if we did this and we say, why don't you describe yourself? Would you feel uncomfortable about that? Would that be difficult for you to be? I mean, we want to be humble, but we don't want to be so humble that everybody thinks we're not something. So it'd be difficult maybe for us to describe ourselves. I'd tell the truth, good looking, smart, all those things, right? And you're laughing. You're like, okay. But this description of Job comes from God. It says, have you considered my servant Job, that there's none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feared God and escheweth evil? That is God's description of him. Now that's a powerful thing, isn't it? How would God describe us tonight? If he's going to describe us, I don't think he'd start with how tall we are or how much we weigh or what clothes we're wearing or how big our nose is or anything, our ears stick out or they fold back like they ought to, I mean, I don't think that's where God's going to start. He's going to start with what is inside. I think maybe the first thing he'd say about you is this. He would describe either you're his servant or not. Either you belong to him or you're not. Oh yeah, that's my servant. I am glad that God could start there with that for me. I belong to him. I am his servant. He could say that truthfully about me. I hope that he could say some of these things about me. Perfect, upright, fearing God, eschewing evil. I'm definitely not Job. But God says, have you considered him? What are you going to do? Let me ask you this question. Somebody can help answer this for me. If you're going to consider somebody, what are you going to do? Evaluate them? How else would you describe that?
Find out things about him.
Find out things about him. Anything else? Consider him. It's a judging. It is. It's a weighing. God says, have you evaluated him? Have you weighed him? Have you judged him? Have you seen what's inside my servant Job? God says this about Job. He says, he's perfect, upright. He's an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. He asked Satan to do an evaluation. He asked Satan to consider him. But before that ever happens, God considers him. God's considered you all day long. You have been on the mind of God. There's not been one moment that he's not thought about you. I think that's a really pleasant kind of thought. That puts me at peace. I am at rest knowing that I am on the mind of God. Doesn't matter where I'm at, what I'm doing, whether I'm doing good or bad, I am in his thoughts. I know this, that I have an intercessor, that I have an advocate with the Father. It is the Lord Jesus Christ himself. He is interceding on my behalf before the Father, and he could say the same thing about us to Satan. He said, have you considered my servant? And name one of our names. It says in verse number 9, it says, then Satan answered the Lord and said, doth Job fear God for naught? What is one of the things, the activities, the things, the way a word maybe possibly that Satan is described? What is one of his chief activities in this world today? Destruction, no doubt about it. Deceiving, no doubt. I'm looking for a different word. Corruption. There you go. That's the one I'm looking for. Accuser. He's an accuser. If you had a little brother, this probably happened maybe, or a little sister, they'd run into mom and they would accuse you before mom. Hey, my brother, he took something that didn't belong to him. That's accusing. Sometimes it may be true, sometimes it may not. If it was my little brother, no doubt it was wrong. It wasn't the truth. So he was an accuser. Satan is an accuser. He says, doth Job fear God for naught? You know what he's saying there? He is saying, Job's got it good. Why wouldn't he fear God? He's serving you because of his prosperity, because of the stuff you've given him. Hey, you've given him 7 sons and 3 daughters. Hey, he's serving you. He fears you because you've done something for him. Hey, I'm considering Job, and I'm looking out into his fields, and I see all the stuff that he has. Is Job serving God for naught? He's asking God that. I'm seeing their houses. I'm seeing his great household. He says in verse number 10, this is still that conversation that's going on there. This is what's going on in heaven. It says, hast not thou made an hedge about him and about his house and about all that he hath on every side? Do you think maybe that's true or false? I think it's probably true. You know, God is pulling a curtain back here, and he's letting us see some of the way he works with man. And one of the things that he does for us, and maybe you have felt it, or maybe you have never considered it, that it exists, he says, hast thou not made an hedge about him, and a hedge about his house, and a hedge about all that he hath on every side? You say, a hedge? You know, you're thinking maybe an ornamental kind of hedge, something that's a pretty thing. I just finished an audio book. It's one of the men that was in the Band of Brothers, a guy by the name of Shifty Powers. He was the sniper, the long shooter. He was from the mountains. It was fun hearing him talk about growing up in the mountains, about how he loved to be in the mountains. I decided that I would have loved to sit on the porch of the Powers family up in the mountains sometime. And the war came, World War II came, and he and a friend, they joined up. And they thought because the paratroopers got $50 extra a month that they'd join the paratroopers. Plus, they thought it was pretty cool. And so they join the paratroopers, they get accepted, they go off the training camp to Toccoa, Georgia, and they make their jumps, you know. I think it's 5 or 6 jumps, and they march all the way to Atlanta to do some more, and they go up the coast. They go up, I think they leave maybe from New York City. They boat across, sail across to England. They're in England for a while, and they're preparing for D-Day. They're going to make a jump behind enemy lines. They're going to go in these gliders, and they're going to jump out of those planes. And there was a great concern, though, because the fields were very dangerous. The Germans had flooded many of those fields, and those fields were circled or boundaried by hedges. The tanks were going to have great difficulty going through a hedge. Can you imagine a hedge so thick, so high, so wide that a tank could not push through it? And they were going to blow holes in those fields, and so the tanks could go through those hedges. Those hedges that were in France, that our troops had to deal with on D-Day, are nothing compared to the hedge that God can put around you. Amen. He protects you. He has strengthened the fence around you. I got to tell you, there in Gary, I heard a sound, and I immediately I'm thinking, was that gunfire? That's probably gunfire. And David, or maybe Kyle Cox, he was there too. One of them said, "It's all right, Brother Jones. It's just the ice machine." And I'm thinking I'm about to belly crawl on the floor, you know. And they said, I was the last one to get there. They said, "We're giving you this room on the first floor." He said, our rooms are either on the second floor or in the basement. And I thought they were going to say, because we didn't want you to have to go up and down stairs. They said, we want you to have this room because you're our first line of defense. If they get in the house, you're going to deal with them first. And I'm checking the locks, I got to tell you. And I'm thinking, those locks aren't going to stop anybody that wants to get in. But I have a different protection that's not a lock. It's not a door. It's not a window. It's not that. I have a protection that is God. God has given me protection. And Satan says, I've seen the hedge that you have around Job. You got a hedge around everything in his life. He says in verse 10, he says, thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. Thou hast blessed the work. You've touched it. It's increased. He says, this is the accusation here in verse 11. He said, but put forth thine hand now, touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. That's the accusation. We're seeing this heavenly council meeting here. Job doesn't know any of this. Job doesn't know what's going on. And this book is going to teach us something. It teaches us how to walk faithfully without knowing why. I want to know why. I want to know why. I want to know why. Why did yesterday have to happen the way it did? Why did that have to happen? God, this wonderful man, this young man with a family, why was he struck down? I got to tell you, we may never know why this side of heaven. We may never know. And so some of the deepest struggles of life may have roots in things that we cannot see. And faith trusts God without oftentimes demanding full explanations. Does God report to me, or do I report to God? You know the answer to that. He doesn't report to me. He doesn't have to check in with me. He doesn't have to tell me anything about this. Now, he gives us quite a bit here. He lets us to peer into heaven and to see something. I want you to notice something, and I'll try to bring this in. I don't know if this is a good place to stop tonight, but I'm going to do that. Go to Isaiah chapter 6, if you would. This is another. There's not many scenes like this where we get a glimpse into heaven. There's not many of these in the Old Testament or the New Testament, but we have a few. It says in Isaiah chapter 6, it says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Okay, we got another view of heaven, eternity. We're looking at God. He's on his throne. It says, above stood the seraphims, these created beings. Each one had 6 wings. With twain he covered his face, and with twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly. And one cried unto another and said, this is what they said. This is what the seraphim said in the presence of God. They said, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Now, if you would turn to Revelation chapter 4. We'll read just a couple verses here, and I want to make a statement, and I think you'll understand where I'm going with this. Revelation chapter 4. And we're going to jump into a scene here. Verse number 1 talks about a door that was opened into heaven. John says in verse 2, immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. Sounds very similar, doesn't it, to Isaiah 6? It really does. It talks about the throne, talks about 24 seats, talks about the throne and lightnings and thunders and voices in verse 5. Talks about the sea of glass, the crystal. Talks about Talks about these four beasts, and let's look in verse number 10. It says, the 24 elders fall down before him that sat on the throne and worship him that liveth forever and ever, and cast their crowns before the throne, saying, Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. Anybody been able to get to heaven today and sit at the throne and see all that God's doing? And did he ever? I mean, we've not been there today. I mean, in a spiritual sense, we've been to the throne of God, but I've not been there like this. And the beings that are there, the elders that are there, they are giving us report. And as God is making decisions, and God is calling the shots, so to speak, as God is orchestrating and moving things and allowing Satan to do things and allowing things to happen in our world, these people that are in heaven that see God and see his decisions and hear his decisions, they are not over the corner going, he shouldn't be doing that. That is a bad move that he's making there. Man, I don't know. Should he have done that? Really? You know, they're whispering in the corner. They're not doing that. They are giving all glory and all praise to him. They are perfectly fine with the decisions that God is making. And we ought to mirror that sort of attitude towards God. We say, I don't understand. I don't know that they understand everything that God's doing. And everything that God is moving and everything that God is allowing. But they say this, whatever he's doing he deserves all glory for that. We are fine with what he's doing. We're okay with that. We're troubled at evil in our world, yes. God pulled a hedge back, seems like yesterday, and allowed something to happen. I don't think God is the originator of evil. He doesn't cause it. But there's times that Satan is allowed to do things. He moves in the lives of people, and people become his tool. We don't understand all of it. We're not privy to what's going on in heaven. But we see glimpses of things, and we know this. There are unseen things going on. There is an unseen world at work. And we know this, that God is at the top of it. We can rest in him. He's about to pull the hedge back on Job. I don't have time to get into much of that tonight. I'm going to stop, I think, where I'm at. Satan's provoked the Lord, and God says, we're going to pull the hedge down. I don't know if you've ever lived in a moment you said in your life, you said, I feel like the hedge has come down in my life. If you live very long, you probably have tasted some of that. Something's touched your life. You say, man, this is unpleasant. This is difficult. I don't like this. Well, know this, that there's not anything that touches your life that God has not said, I'm going to allow that. I'm going to let that come. It's passed through his fingers. It's passed through his judgment. The things that are about to happen to Job, God says, you can do this, you can do this, and you can do this, but you can't do that. Satan still has his limits. There are things that he can't do unless God lets him. And so I can say this, that whether I'm in Gary or halfway around the world, that I am safe in the hands of God. I am safe. I can rest in him. I can pillow my head at night and feel comfortable. I'm not done here on this planet until he says I'm done. And so Job's not privy to all this, but through Job's story, we are privy to it. We are allowed to see it. And so we're going to get there. Next week he has wave after wave after wave of things that happen. And so we're going to quit there. We're going to take a few minutes to pray.